Welcome back to another episode of ATP Ask the Pastor. I'm Pastor Joshua Sullivan at Holy Cross Lutheran Church in Kerrville, Texas. Today someone writes, "Dear Pastor, why did Pieper think Christians could not endorse the Copernican cosmos?" Page 473. All right. Francis Pieper, he was the fourth president of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and prior to that he was a pastor and a seminary professor. He's most well known for his three-volume work, Christian Dogmatics, which until a few years ago was the standard dogmatics textbook in Lutheran Church Missouri Synod seminaries. In Pieper's discussion of the fourth day of creation, he writes, "It is unworthy of a Christian to interpret Scripture, which he knows to be God's own word, according to human opinions, and that includes the Copernican cosmic system, or to have others thus to interpret Scripture to him." Pieper makes his opinion even more clear then in the footnote that the geocentric view of the universe is the teaching of Scripture and experience. Now this leads us to ask, why would Pieper make such a dogmatic assertion, and is that actually the position of Scripture and the Lutheran Church? From antiquity, with one exception, everybody believed that the earth was the unmoving center of the universe, so geocentrism. Everything else moved around the earth in their own crystalline spheres. Now this was the view of the universe until 1543, when Nicholas Copernicus published his book on the revolutions of the heavenly bodies. And in that work he presented evidence that the earth revolves around the sun and that the earth rotates on its own axis each day. Now, Copernicus's views didn't really take off until Galileo and then Johannes Kepler advanced his theory with their own work. Galileo's discovery led to the Roman Catholic Church declaring the heliocentric theory as an erroneous belief, and Rome also then banned Copernicus's book. Things were a bit different, though, in Lutheran circles. Now, Luther made one remark during his lifetime about Copernicus at the supper table in 1539. He is recorded to have said, "There is talk of a new astrologer who wants to prove that the earth moves and goes around instead of the sky, the sun, the moon, just as if somebody were moving in a carriage or ship might hold that he was sitting still and at rest while the earth and the trees walked and moved. But that is how things are nowadays. When a man wishes to be clever, he must needs invent something special, and the way he does it must needs be the best. The fool wants to turn the whole art of astronomy upside down. However, as Holy Scripture tells us, so did Joshua bid the sun to stand still and not the earth." Now, we shouldn't make too much of Luther's comment for two reasons. First, this is a hot take of Luther's at the dinner table. Second, he said this in 1539, several years before Copernicus's book would even be published. However, Luther's comment reveals the potential theological problem that's inherent in a heliocentric view of the universe. When Joshua leads Israel against the 5 Amorite kings, he prayed that the sun would stand still so that Israel would have more daylight with which to finish the battle. He writes in Joshua 10:13, "So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped till the people had revenge upon their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day." Now this makes sense in a geocentric worldview. If the sun usually orbits the stationary earth, then God simply holds the sun still in place for a time. The same understanding would work for Isaiah 38:8, when the Lord reverses the sun's course 10 degrees on the sundial as a sign to Hezekiah. Now, this is not to say, however, that the ancients or anyone who followed their theories were rubes. Until Copernicus, everyone, again with one exception of an ancient Greek astronomer, believed that the earth was the unmoving center of the universe. And our own experience lends itself to such a view, and even our language of sunrise and sunset, they're geocentric. Now, the sun isn't actually setting or rising. The earth is actually rotating on its axis. But to our view, we see that phenomenon as the sun rising and setting. The Lutheran interaction with Copernican theory was actually much more than Luther's offhand tabletop comment. Philip Melanchthon, he held to a Ptolemaic view of the cosmos, but he did not impede others on the Wittenberg faculty from exploring Copernicus's theory. George Rheticus is the prime example of this. Rheticus was a mathematician who taught at Wittenberg, and in 1539, after Copernicus's views had been made known, Rheticus took leave from the university to visit Copernicus. And during this time, his position at the University of Wittenberg was kept for him. Being convinced that Copernicus was right, he wrote a public report of his firsthand knowledge of the new system, and then when he arrived back in Wittenberg, he resumes his teaching post and is soon made the dean of the Faculty of Arts. Now, while teaching at Wittenberg, Rheticus traveled to Nuremberg several times to supervise the publication of Copernicus's book on the revolution of the heavenly bodies. Simultaneously, Rheticus arranged for a shorter book by Copernicus to be published in Wittenberg by the same printer who printed Luther's German Bible. So Melanchthon also supported the work of Wittenberg professor Erasmus Reinhold. Reinhold wrote a book of planetary tables based upon the planetary motions described in Copernicus's work. In that work, Reinhold not only used Copernicus's theory, but specifically praises Copernicus and his book on the revolutions of the heavenly bodies. So not only did Melanchthon support Reinhold in his work, but after his death, Melanchthon praised him both as a man of learning and as an evangelical Christian. Now, although Melanchthon didn't personally accept the Copernican theory, he didn't hinder it from being taught at Wittenberg or elsewhere. In fact, Melanchthon himself seems to have softened to Copernicus's theory over the course of time. So in his 1549 book, Beginnings of Physical Instruction, he opposed the Copernican system. Yet in the same year, in an address commemorating Caspar Cruciger, a fellow reformer with Luther who had died the previous year, Melanchthon wrote this: "Moved by these and similar observations, we have begun to admire and love Copernicus more." Now, with the second edition of his Beginnings of Physical Instruction, when that appears, Melanchthon had removed the prior antagonistic allusions to Copernicus. Melanchthon was still committed to a geocentric worldview, primarily because he was a humanist entrenched in the cosmology of Aristotle and Ptolemy. But as the dean of the University of Wittenberg, he didn't stand in the way of others disseminating Copernican theory. So the history of Lutheran interaction with Copernican theory shows us that the reformers didn't think heliocentrism as of a heresy that would put one outside the faith. Now, in light of all of this, we go back to Francis Pieper and we see that he gets two things wrong. First, he's either unaware of or ignoring Lutheranism's willingness to accept Copernicus's views. Second, he understands passages about the sun standing still in an absolute cosmic sense rather than in a phenomenological way, that is, from the point of view of Joshua or the prophet Isaiah. So Pieper, like many before him, built a rigid cosmology, reading Joshua and Isaiah in that absolute sense. Now, regardless of how God made the sun stand still, the how isn't important. The important part is that God did it. And in that, it's no different than any other miracle that God performs. Pieper gets one thing right, though, in his overall point. Scientific theories don't interpret Scripture. And this is wise, especially today when we see that very thing happening in some American evangelical circles and the Roman Catholic Church's view that the theory of evolution informs how we should understand the creation accounts in Genesis. Now, the difference between the two, besides the fact that heliocentrism is observable and evolution is not, is that the theory of evolution contradicts Scripture, whereas the fact that the earth revolves around the sun doesn't contradict Scripture when we understand it correctly. So yes, you can be a Copernican, and still be a faithful evangelical Christian. Hope this helps. If you would like to ask the pastor something, email me, atpholycross@gmail.com. We'll get to your question as soon as we are able. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.